The moment his hand closed around her hair, 37 Marines in that mess hall were absolutely certain of one thing. The small woman sitting alone in the corner was about to learn a painful lesson about trespassing on territory that didn't belong to her. 3 seconds later, Corporal Brock Hadley lay face down on the concrete floor, his shoulder joint screaming in agony, 220 pounds of Marine Corps muscle rendered completely helpless. And everything they thought they knew about the world began to crumble. But to understand what happened in Mess Hall Charlie on that Tuesday evening, you first need to understand what happened 6 months earlier, 8,000 miles away in a place where the air smelled of dust and blood and the bitter ash of intelligence failures. Mogadishu, Somalia. 6 months ago, the door exploded inward with a crack that split the night like thunder. Wood splinters pirouetted through smoke-choked air as Commander Vivian Caldwell crossed the threshold into hell. Her SEAL Team 5 operators stacked behind her in perfect formation, weapons up, night vision painting the world in shades of green death. The compound should have been clear. That's what Marine Force Recon Intelligence had promised. One target, minimal security, a clean snatch and grab that would put a high-value terrorist in a black site interrogation room before sunrise. The intel was wrong. 12 hostiles materialized from the shadows like demons summoned from nightmare. Muzzle flashes strobed the darkness into a hellish disco of violence. The staccato rhythm of automatic weapons fire drowning out the careful tactical calls that had been drilled into them through years of training. The first burst caught Lieutenant Nolan Briggs in the doorway, Vivian's best friend since Bud S training. The man who had pulled her through Hell Week when hypothermia had her seeing things that weren't there. The man who had believed in her when half the instructors were betting she'd ring the bell before day 3. The man who carried a photograph of his wife in his chest pocket right over his heart because he said it reminded him what he was fighting for. He went down hard. The 7.62 rounds punched through his body armor like it was made of paper. Kevlar couldn't stop that kind of velocity, that kind of hatred compressed into copper and lead. Nolan's body jerked with each impact, a puppet whose strings were being cut one by one. He was still alive when he hit the ground. Vivian saw his eyes find hers through the chaos, saw his lips move trying to form words that his punctured lungs couldn't support. She returned fire on instinct, her HK-4 and 16 barking controlled pairs into center mass. 2 hostiles dropped before her conscious mind even registered what was happening. But her eyes kept going back to Nolan lying in the doorway, his blood pooling around him like a dark halo spreading across the concrete. Behind her, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb took rounds to the throat and chest. 15 years of service, 3 months from retirement. His wife had already picked out the house in San Diego where they were going to grow old together, the one with the view of the ocean and the garden where she wanted to plant roses. He'd shown Vivian pictures just last week, his face lit up with the kind of hope that men in their profession rarely allowed themselves to feel. His death rattle was a wet gurgle that would haunt her dreams for months. Petty Officer, First Class. Laura Jennings caught a round through her left eye. She had a husband named David and a daughter named Emma who had just turned 4. Emma still asked when Mommy was coming home, David had told Vivian at the memorial service. She didn't understand. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that Mommy isn't coming home? How do you explain that Mommy died because someone decided their assumptions were more reliable than verified intelligence? Laura was dead before gravity claimed her body. The firefight lasted 93 seconds. When the smoke cleared and the ringing in Vivian's ears faded to a dull roar, 3 of her operators were cooling on blood-slicked concrete. The rest of the team secured a compound that should have been manageable, but had instead become a slaughterhouse. The high-value target escaped through a tunnel system that wasn't on any map the Marines had provided. The weapons cache they'd been warned about turned out to be enough ordnance to level a city block, and 3 of the finest operators America had ever produced were dead because someone had decided that local intelligence sources were unreliable, because someone had looked at contradictory information and dismissed it, because the culture of Marine Force Recon said they knew better, they always knew better, and anyone who suggested otherwise was clearly not as capable as them. Vivian knelt beside Nolan's body. His blood was still warm as it soaked through her gloves. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and she reached out with trembling fingers to close them. The photograph of his wife had fallen from his pocket. It lay in the blood beside him, Sarah's smiling face looking up at a sky that would never see her husband come home. "I'm sorry, Nolan." Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so goddamn sorry." But sorry wouldn't bring him back. Sorry wouldn't explain to Sarah why her husband died in a doorway 8,000 miles from home. Sorry wouldn't change the fact that institutional arrogance, the assumption that Marines knew better than anyone else, the dismissal of intelligence from sources they deemed beneath them, had killed three of the finest warriors Vivian had ever served with. The after-action report would be sanitized, classified, buried under enough red tape to choke a bureaucrat. The official story would mention hostile action and operational complexity and the fog of war. But Vivian would remember the truth. She would carry those deaths like stones in her chest, and she would make damn sure that the culture that killed her friends faced a reckoning. Naval Special Warfare Command, Virginia Beach, 2 weeks after Somalia. The office was small and functional, the kind of space that valued efficiency over comfort. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A single window looked out at a gray sky that seemed to match Vivian's mood. And behind the desk sat a man who had seen everything she was going through decades before she was born. Master Chief Garrett Holloway was 58 years old with 35 years of service behind him and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from weathered oak. His hair had gone completely silver cut high and tight in the manner of a man who saw no reason to change what worked. His eyes were the color of old steel, and they held the weight of every mission, every loss, every hard choice that came with a career spent in the shadows. He'd been Vivian's mentor since her first day at Buddhas, the instructor who had seen something in her that others missed. The voice in her ear during the hardest moments reminding her that pain was temporary but quitting lasted forever. He'd watched her grow from a determined young woman into one of the finest operators he'd ever trained, and now he watched her struggle with a grief that he knew all too well. "You want to burn them down?" It wasn't a question. Holloway's voice was low and rough, like gravel being poured over sandpaper. He'd seen this before, lived it himself. Vivian's jaw tightened. "They killed my people, Master Chief. Their arrogance, their assumptions, their absolute certainty that they knew better than everyone else. That's what killed Nolan. That's what killed Marcus and Laura. And the official report is going to say it was enemy action and move on like it never happened." Holloway was quiet for a long moment. His fingers drummed slowly on the desk, a rhythm that seemed to keep time with memories he rarely spoke of. Grenada, 1983. Vivian looked up. She knew the operation, of course. Everyone in special operations knew the history, but she'd never heard Holloway talk about it personally. "I was 23 years old." Holloway's voice was distant now, traveling back through decades. "We went in on intelligence that said the airfield was lightly defended. 6 of my brothers died in the first 90 seconds because someone decided that local reports of heavy fortification weren't credible, didn't fit their assumptions about what a small Caribbean island could field. The similarity was not lost on Vivian. The pattern, the arrogance, the cost. After we got home, I was angry," Holloway continued. "Angry like you're angry now. I wanted someone to pay. So I found the officers responsible for the intelligence failure, and I destroyed their careers. Every connection I had, every favor I was owed, I used to make sure they never worked in military intelligence again." Vivian leaned forward. "Good." Holloway shook his head slowly. "No, not good." He stood and walked to the window, his back to her, looking out at the gray sky. "I cut down the trees, but I didn't pull up the roots." 30 years later, I watched the same kind of institutional arrogance kill operators in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and now in Somalia. Because removing the people didn't change the culture, it just replaced them with other people who thought exactly the same way. He turned back to face her. "You have an opportunity I didn't have, Vivian. You can do more than punish. You can change." "What are you suggesting?" Holloway reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. He slid it across to her. The classification markings on the cover were higher than most people would ever see in their careers. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Marine Corps Base. There's a Force Recon unit there. Bravo Company. They've been flagged for assessment due to concerning patterns in their operational culture. Vivian opened the folder. Inside were reports, evaluations, incident summaries. A picture began to emerge of a unit that had become an echo chamber where questioning assumptions was treated as disloyalty and outsiders were viewed as threats rather than resources. The same attitudes that killed your people in Somalia, Holloway said quietly. The same culture, the same blind spots. You want me to assess them? I want you to do more than that. Holloway's steel gray eyes met hers. I want you to go there and see what they really are, not what they show their commanding officers, what they are when they think no one important is watching. And if they're what I think they'll be, then you have the authority to recommend their dissolution. Holloway tapped the folder. It's all in there. But that's the easy path. That's what I did in '83. The hard path is finding a way to change them. Vivian looked at the folder for a long moment. What if they can't be changed? Holloway's voice was soft now, but it carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Everyone can be changed. The question is whether they're willing to face what they've become. Your job is to hold up a mirror so clear that they can't look away from their own reflection. He paused. I'll go with you. As a technical advisor, you'll do the assessment, make the calls. But I've been where you are now, and I've seen what happens when anger makes the decisions instead of wisdom. Vivian closed the folder. When do we leave Camp Lejeune, North Carolina? Present day. The Marine Corps base spread across 153 square miles of North Carolina coastal plain. It was one of the largest concentrations of Marines and sailors in the world, a small city dedicated to the projection of American military power. Vivian had arrived 72 hours ago, but she hadn't announced her presence to anyone except the base commander and a handful of officers with the security clearances necessary to know about her mission. She'd spent those 72 hours learning everything she could about Bravo Company. She'd mapped their patrol routes and training schedules. She'd identified their communication frequencies and hacked into their encrypted channels using equipment that officially didn't exist. She'd photographed their rally points, documented their supply caches, and built a complete picture of their operational patterns. And she'd listened. Every crude joke in the gym, every boast in the barracks, every conversation where they talked about their superiority over other units, other services, other people who didn't fit their narrow definition of what a warrior should look like. She'd heard them discuss the new diversity initiatives with contempt, heard them mock the idea that standards might need to change, heard them reinforce each other's biases with the casual certainty of men who had never been challenged on their assumptions. The picture wasn't pretty, but Vivian knew that documented failures weren't enough. Anyone could write a report. Anyone could catalog violations and recommend disciplinary action. That was the easy path, the one Holloway had taken in 1983. If she was going to change this culture instead of just punishing it, she needed to show them what they really were. She needed to hold up a mirror so clear that they couldn't look away. And that meant walking into their world without her armor, without her rank, without anything that would tell them she was someone worth respecting. She needed to see what they were when they thought no one important was watching. Mess Hall Charlie, 1900 hours. The fluorescent lights buzzed with the persistence of angry wasps casting their harsh institutional glare across rows of metal tables where 37 Marines hunched over evening chow like kings surveying conquered territory. The air was thick with the smell of industrial meatloaf, the particular musk of men who believed they owned every square inch of ground they walked on, and the acrid bite of testosterone-fueled arrogance that had been fermenting in this unit for longer than anyone cared to admit. At the center table, surrounded by his court of sycophants and true believers, sat Staff Sergeant Wade Thornton. At 34, he was what happened when you took a recruiting poster and gave it just enough life to be dangerous. Square jaw that could have been chiseled from granite, shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of democracy itself, or at least the delusion that he represented its finest expression. His eyes were the color of slate, hard and cold, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. His uniform was pressed to parade ground perfection. His boots were polished to a mirror shine. His bearing was that of a man who had never met a problem he couldn't solve, with superior firepower and unwavering conviction. The Marines around him hung on his every word like it was gospel handed down from Chesty Puller himself. But look closer. Look past the polished surface and practiced bravado, and you'd see the hairline fractures spreading through the foundation. Thornton's hands tremored slightly when he thought nobody was watching, a tremor that could have been too much coffee or something considerably stronger. His eyes were bloodshot, whether from exhaustion or the bottle he kept in his footlocker was anyone's guess. Most telling of all was the desperate edge to his confidence, the kind that came from a man who knew his glory days were behind him and was terrified of sliding into irrelevance. To his right sat Corporal Brock Hadley, 26 years old but carrying himself like he owned the world and was considering expansion plans. Built like a linebacker with hands the size of dinner plates. He was the unit's self-appointed enforcer, the one they called when someone needed an attitude adjustment delivered with maximum prejudice. His knuckles bore the permanent discoloration of a man who had settled too many arguments with violence. His smile never quite reached his eyes. Those eyes were pale blue, cold as Arctic water, and about as sympathetic. Hadley had washed out of Ranger School twice, not for lack of physical capability, but because he couldn't follow orders from anyone he didn't respect. That failure had calcified into resentment that he wore like a badge of honor, a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. He'd learned to channel that resentment into being the biggest, baddest son of a bitch in any room he entered. So far, that strategy had served him well enough. Completing their inner circle was Private First Class Colton Reeves, the youngest at 22, still carrying that desperate hunger of a man trying to prove he belonged. Fresh out of advanced infantry training with scores high enough to write his own ticket, he'd requested assignment to Bravo Company specifically because of their reputation. Smart enough to have earned a full scholarship to Duke, which he'd turned down to enlist because he wanted to prove himself where it really mattered. His need for validation made him eager to please, willing to follow wherever the older Marines led, desperate to belong to something bigger than himself. He sat at the edge of the group now, laughing when the others laughed, nodding when they spoke, hoping to absorb some of their confidence through proximity. The mess hall operated on unwritten rules as rigid as any military regulation. Officers sat separately from enlisted. Senior NCOs commanded the prime real estate near the windows. Junior Marines filled in the spaces left behind, grateful for whatever scraps of recognition filtered down from above. Women, the few who were stationed here, kept to their own corner, a safety measure born of bitter experience with Marines who saw them as invaders in their sacred brotherhood. I'm telling you, Thornton leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, holding court like a king who sensed rebellion brewing in the provinces. These budget cuts are going to separate the wheat from the chaff. Units that can't hack it are going to get folded into larger commands or disbanded entirely. Natural selection. Darwin in digital camo. Hadley grunted agreement, his grin all teeth and no warmth. Good. About time they cut the dead weight. Too many soft units getting by on participation trophies and sensitivity training. Reeves nodded enthusiastically, hoping his agreement would be noticed. Force Recon owns this base. Always has, always will. The conversation drifted to cruder topics. Complaints about regulations that expected them to treat female personnel with professional respect. Speculation about upcoming deployments to somewhere hot and sandy where they could finally get back to real soldiering. The kind of talk that seemed harmless until you realized it was a symptom of something much deeper and much more toxic. None of them noticed when she walked in. The woman who entered Mess Hall Charlie moved with an economy of motion that spoke of absolute confidence in her environment. She was maybe 5'7", athletic build visible even under the loose-fitting Navy utility uniform she wore. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail that caught the fluorescent light like copper wire, and her green eyes swept the room with the kind of systematic assessment that came from years of reading hostile environments for threats and opportunities. She carried a simple metal tray and moved toward the serving line like she belonged there, like she had every right to share their space, like she was utterly oblivious to the fact that she had just walked into a den of lions who weren't accustomed to uninvited guests. She wore no visible rank insignia. Her uniform was Navy issue, but the patches had been removed, leaving only faint outlines where they'd once been attached. To the casual observer, and every Marine in that mess hall was a casual observer. At best, she looked like a civilian contractor, maybe a Pentagon liaison, possibly even a reporter doing a story on military life. Someone temporary, someone who didn't matter, someone who definitely didn't belong in their sacred space. But tucked under her arm, visible only for a moment as she shifted her tray, was a slim leather folder with classification markings that would have raised alarms if anyone had bothered to look closely. They didn't. They were too busy making assumptions. Vivian found an empty table in the corner. The table the female Marines usually claimed when they had no choice but to eat in the main mess. She sat down alone. Her positioning was deliberate. Back to the wall. Clear sight lines to all three entrances. Unobstructed view of the entire room. She began eating with the methodical efficiency of someone who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure. But one hand remained free, resting on the table within easy reach of the small notebook she'd pulled from her pocket. She seemed completely unaware of the attention she was drawing, the way conversation stopped at nearby tables, the way Marines were beginning to turn in their chairs to get a better look at the intruder who had wandered into their territory without invitation or apparent awareness of the social order she was violating. She wasn't unaware. She was cataloging every failure. Not one person in this room had approached her to verify her identity. Not one had asked for her credentials. Not one had followed the basic security protocols that were supposed to be second nature to military personnel. If she had been an actual threat, half of them would be dead by now. Thornton noticed her first. His eyes narrowed as he took in her presence with the predatory attention of a shark scenting blood in the water. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and watched her move through the serving line with the kind of cold assessment that made smart people nervous and stupid people combative. Well, well, his voice carried just far enough to be heard at surrounding tables. Looks like we've got ourselves a lost little lamb. Hadley followed his sergeant's gaze and grinned. Pentagon, send us a babysitter, Sarge someone, to make sure we're playing nice with our toys and using our inside voices. Reeves laughed a little too hard, desperate to be included. Thornton's smile was cold and calculating. In his mind, this was an opportunity, a chance to reassert the natural order, to remind everyone present that this was his domain and outsiders weren't welcome. More importantly, it was a chance to demonstrate to his Marines that he was still the alpha, still the man they should fear and respect above all others, still relevant in a world that seemed increasingly designed to make men like him obsolete. The stage was set. The hierarchy was established. The players were in position. None of them had any idea that the quiet woman eating alone in the corner had more combat experience than their entire unit combined. That her kill count included high-value targets they'd only heard whispered about in classified intelligence briefings. That she could end any three of them without breaking a sweat or raising her heart rate above resting. They were about to learn that assumptions could be more dangerous than enemy fire. Vivian wrote in her notebook with small, precise strokes. She wasn't doodling. She was documenting, sketching the floor layout with professional precision, marking sight lines and cover positions and fields of fire with the practiced hand of someone who had done this in environments where mistakes meant body bags. She was building her case, piece by piece, observation by observation, and Bravo Company was failing every test she'd set before them without even realizing they were being tested. The conversation at Thornton's table was getting louder and more animated. She caught fragments through the ambient noise. Complaints about new regulations, speculation about upcoming deployments, crude jokes about female personnel. Hadley's voice carried particularly well, probably by design. He was the type who needed an audience for his performance, validation for his dominance. I'm telling you, these diversity initiatives are going to get people killed. You can't lower standards just to make politicians feel good about themselves. Combat doesn't care about your gender or your feelings. It cares about whether you can carry your weight and pull your trigger when things get real. Murmurs of agreement rippled through his audience. Thornton leaned back with the satisfied expression of a man watching his disciples spread his gospel. Standards are standards for a reason. The moment you start compromising them, you're not helping anyone. You're just getting people killed to serve some political agenda. Vivian continued eating, continued taking notes, continued cataloging the dozens of ways these Marines were failing basic professional standards. She'd seen this movie before. She knew how it ended. The only question was whether she'd need to accelerate the timeline or let their natural stupidity run its course. That's when Corporal Brock Hadley made his first tactical error. He stood up from his table, ostensibly to clear his tray, but his path took him directly past Vivian's corner table. Not a coincidence. The serving line and disposal area were in the opposite direction. This was a deliberate maneuver, a probing action designed to test her reaction and establish his dominance of the space. Vivian didn't look up from her notebook, didn't acknowledge his presence, didn't give him the confrontation he was clearly seeking. In her experience, men like Hadley escalated when ignored. They revealed their true nature when they thought nobody important was watching. She was about to give him all the rope he needed to hang himself. Hadley paused beside her table, close enough that his shadow fell across her notes. Still, she didn't react, just continued writing in small, controlled strokes. Subject demonstrates predatory approach pattern, testing boundaries, seeking confrontation, classic dominance behavior consistent with insecure authority complex. "Excuse me, ma'am." Hadley's tone was superficially polite, but it carried an undertone of condescension thick enough to choke on. "I don't think we've been introduced." Vivian looked up. She met his eyes with the kind of level stare that had made insurgent leaders reconsider their life choices. Her gaze was calm, professional, utterly devoid of the nervousness or deference he'd been expecting. Those green eyes held depths that should have warned him he was making a terrible mistake. But Hadley had never been particularly good at reading warning signs. "No." Her voice was quiet but clear. "We haven't." The silence stretched out between them. Hadley had expected elaboration, explanation, the kind of nervous chatter that uncertain people use to fill uncomfortable spaces. Instead, he got nothing, just those green eyes watching him like a scientist observing a specimen. "I'm Corporal Hadley." He extended his hand with forced friendliness that was really just another form of aggression. "Bravo Company Force Recon. And you are?" Vivian looked at his outstretched hand for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be noticeable, short enough to avoid outright rudeness. Then she returned to her notebook without accepting the gesture. "Busy." The single word carried more dismissal than an entire paragraph of explanation could have conveyed. It hit Hadley like a physical blow. Around the mess hall, conversations had stopped. Marines were turning in their chairs to watch. Phones appeared as word spread. Everyone wanted to witness what happened when someone disrespected Bravo Company's enforcer. This wasn't how these encounters were supposed to go. Hadley was Force Recon. He was Alpha. He was supposed to command respect and deference, not get dismissed like some boot private who'd forgotten his place. His face flushed red. "Look, lady." His voice dropped to a register meant to be threatening. "I don't know who you are or why you're here, but this is a Marine facility. We have protocols, procedures, ways of doing things. Maybe you're lost. Maybe you're in the wrong building. Maybe you need an escort back to wherever you're supposed to be." Vivian finished writing her sentence. Subject escalates to verbal intimidation when social dominance challenged. Predicted behavior pattern confirmed. She capped her pen with deliberate precision and looked up at him again. This time her expression held a hint of amusement, the kind of patient tolerance you might show a particularly slow child who was trying very hard but still missing the point. "Corporal," her voice carried just far enough to be heard at surrounding tables. "Do you always introduce yourself to visitors by assuming they're lost and offering to escort them off base?" It was a perfect trap. If he backed down now, he'd look weak in front of his audience. His carefully cultivated reputation for dominance would be shattered by a woman who wouldn't even shake his hand. If he escalated, he'd be taking action against an unidentified individual without proper authority or justification. A violation of the very protocols he'd just claimed to care about. Either choice would reveal critical information about his judgment, his training, and his fitness for leadership. Hadley chose escalation. His hand moved toward her shoulder, ostensibly to guide her to her feet, actually to establish physical dominance through uninvited contact. It was a move that had worked for him before. He had no idea that the woman sitting quietly in the corner had spent the last decade perfecting the art of violence, that her hands were classified as lethal weapons by 3 different government agencies, that her reflexes had been honed in environments where hesitation measured in milliseconds meant death. Vivian's eyes went cold, and for just a moment Hadley's survival instincts registered something that made every alarm bell in his primitive hindbrain start screaming warnings. His pride refused to listen. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. but every Marine in Mess Hall Charlie would remember it for the rest of their lives. Hadley's hand was 6 inches from Vivian's shoulder when the world shifted on its axis. She didn't move like other people moved. There was no wasted motion, no telegraphed intention, no warning signs that her body was about to become a weapon. One moment she was sitting quietly with her notebook. The next she was flowing upward like water, taking the shape of violence. Her left hand intercepted his wrist with surgical precision. Her fingers found the pressure point where the radial nerve surfaced just below his thumb joint. The contact lasted exactly 1 second, long enough to send white-hot agony shooting up his arm like molten copper through his veins. Not long enough for him to process what was happening. As Hadley's body instinctively tried to pull away from the pain, Vivian used his own momentum against him. Her right hand appeared at his elbow, not grabbing, just guiding, redirecting his energy along vectors that his body understood, but his brain couldn't comprehend. Physics took over with the inexorable certainty of gravity. Hadley's center of gravity shifted forward, his weight committed to a direction he hadn't chosen. His 220 pounds of Marine Corps muscle suddenly as helpless as a child's toy in the hands of someone who understood leverage and anatomy and the beautiful simplicity of applied force. Vivian stepped aside like a matador avoiding a bull, and suddenly Brock Hadley was airborne. His trajectory carried him past her table. He hit the concrete floor hard, shoulder first, then hip. Finally, the side of his face met unforgiving concrete with a sound like someone dropping a sack of potatoes from a significant height. The silence that followed was absolute. 37 Marines sat frozen, forks halfway to mouths, conversations interrupted mid-syllable, every eye locked on the impossible sight before them. Corporal Hadley, 6'2", 220 pounds of force recon muscle and attitude, sprawled on the floor like a discarded puppet, and a woman who couldn't weigh more than 140 pounds standing over him like she just swatted a mosquito. Physics. Vivian's voice carried clearly in the stunned silence. Action-reaction. You grabbed. I redirected. Basic Newtonian mechanics. She looked down at him with an expression of patient professionalism. Also personal space, Corporal. Generally speaking, you don't touch people without permission, especially people you don't know. Especially when those people are sitting quietly eating their dinner and minding their own business. Hadley rolled onto his back. His face was a mask of shock and humiliation and dawning rage. His right arm hung useless, the nerve strike still sending lightning bolts of pain through his nervous system. That was a cheap shot. His voice was cracked and uncertain. A fluke. You got lucky because I wasn't expecting, Corporal. Vivian's smile was winter cold. If I wanted to sucker punch you, you'd still be unconscious. What you experienced was a compliance technique designed to disengage unwanted physical contact. It's the same move they teach to elementary school children in anti-bullying programs. She paused, letting that comparison sink in. The fact that it worked on you says more about your training than mine. The mess hall held its breath. Hadley struggled to his feet, cradling his injured arm. His face was flushed with embarrassment and fury. His breathing was rapid and shallow. The fall had rattled him more than physically. It had shattered his self-image and replaced it with the humiliating reality of being prey. His hands curled into fists. Tell you what, lady, his voice carried to every corner of the room now, playing to his audience, because that was all he had left. You apologize for that cheap shot, and I'll forget this ever happened. We'll call it a misunderstanding. No harm, no foul. You can go back to whatever Pentagon desk you crawled out from under, and we can all move on with our lives. Vivian looked at him with clinical interest. And if I don't apologize, Hadley's grin was all teeth and no warmth. Then maybe you need to learn some respect for Marines in general and me in particular. It was a threat. Clear, unambiguous. Delivered in front of 36 witnesses with their phones out and recording. Vivian cataloged it with all the other evidence she was accumulating. Corporal. Her voice carried the kind of matter-of-fact calm that made smart people nervous and stupid people furious. Are you challenging me to a fight? The question was asked with such clinical detachment that it took a moment for its implications to sink in. Hadley's bravado faltered slightly. She'd already put him on the floor once without apparent effort. She was smaller, lighter, presumably weaker by every conventional metric. But something about the way she stood, relaxed but ready, suggested that conventional assumptions might not apply. Before he could answer, his hands shot toward her ponytail. Pure instinct, pure ego, pure stupidity distilled into a single motion. His fingers closed around auburn hair. And the education of Bravo Company truly began. What followed wasn't a fight. A fight implied some degree of mutual participation, a back-and-forth exchange where both parties had at least a theoretical chance of victory. This was a clinic, a master class in applied violence delivered with surgical precision. Vivian's body uncoiled from her stance like a compressed spring suddenly released. Her right elbow drove backward into Hadley's solar plexus with piledriver force. The blow landed exactly where anatomy textbooks said it would do maximum damage, just below the sternum, directly into the cluster of nerves that controlled his diaphragm. The air exploded from his lungs. His brain's autonomic systems went haywire, forgetting how to make his body breathe. As Hadley doubled over, gasping like a landed fish, Vivian's left hand captured his wrist and applied a joint lock that turned his own momentum into a lever against his shoulder socket. The Kimura. The lock engaged with mechanical precision. Hadley's shoulder joint reached its maximum range of motion, then kept going, ligaments stretching past their design parameters. Pain shot down his arm, white-hot and all-consuming. The human shoulder. Vivian's voice was conversational lecturing. It's a remarkably complex joint. 26 separate muscles, 4 major ligament groups, a range of motion that makes it incredibly versatile but structurally vulnerable. She adjusted her grip slightly. Hadley made a sound like a wounded animal. For instance, she continued, if I rotate your arm just 3 degrees further in this direction, your shoulder dislocates. 6 degrees and the rotator cuff tears. 9 degrees and you're looking at reconstructive surgery and 18 months of physical therapy before you can even think about returning to active duty. She held the lock for exactly 5 seconds, long enough to demonstrate complete control, not long enough to cause permanent damage. Professional courtesy from someone who understood the difference between teaching and destroying. Then she released him with a casual motion that sent him stumbling backward into an empty chair. Staff Sergeant Wade Thornton was on his feet. His face had cycled through the entire spectrum of human emotion and settled somewhere between rage and disbelief. His carefully constructed hierarchy, where Marines sat at the apex of military evolution, was crumbling before his eyes. That's enough. His voice cracked like a whip. I don't know who you think you are, lady, but you just assaulted 2 of my Marines. That's a criminal offense. The military police are going to be very interested in hearing about this. Vivian looked at him with patient tolerance. Sergeant, your Marine grabbed my hair without permission. That's assault. I defended myself using appropriate force proportional to the threat. Everything that happened after that was his choice to escalate rather than disengage. She gestured toward Hadley, who was slowly regaining his ability to breathe normally. I gave him multiple opportunities to walk away. I offered clear verbal warnings. He chose violence. I simply responded more efficiently than he expected. Thornton's hands were clenched into fists. His jaw was working like he was chewing nails. You think this is funny? He took a step closer to her. You think you can come into my mess hall, assault my Marines, and walk away like nothing happened? Your mess hall, Vivian's eyebrows rose slightly. That's fascinating, Sergeant. I was under the impression this was a United States Marine Corps facility open to all authorized personnel. When did it become your personal kingdom? The question hit its target with sniper rifle precision. Thornton's face flushed red. His rational mind yielded completely to his emotional need for dominance. You want to know whose kingdom this is? He stepped closer, using his height and bulk as weapons of intimidation. Let me explain how things work around here. This is Bravo Company. These are my Marines. And you, he pointed a thick finger at her face. You're nobody. A civilian contractor maybe. A Pentagon desk jockey probably. Some admiral's diversity hire who thinks a weekend self-defense class makes her a warrior. But you're about to learn what happens when you disrespect real Marines in their own house. Vivian didn't react to the finger in her face. She just looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through his bluster. You're right about one thing, Sergeant. Her voice was quiet and every Marine leaned forward to hear. I am nobody. Just someone trying to eat dinner in peace before I brief your commanding officer on inter-service cooperation protocols. The mention of the commanding officer should have been a warning. Instead, it seemed to inflame Thornton's paranoia further. Brief the CO about what his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. About how my Marines need sensitivity training. About how we're all sexist pigs who can't handle strong women. About how the Corps needs to lower its standards. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled a slim leather wallet from her pocket. She opened it with deliberate precision and held it out where everyone could see. The identification card inside bore official seals, classification levels that made Thornton's secret clearance look like a library card, a photograph that left no doubt about her identity. Commander Vivian Caldwell, her voice carried to every corner of the now silent mess hall. SEAL Team 5, Naval Special Warfare Command, currently conducting classified assessment of inter-service cooperation protocols and unit readiness for joint operations. She paused. And I have orders authorizing me to recommend that Bravo Company be dissolved. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that followed explosions, when the human ear was temporarily deafened and the world seemed to exist in perfect crystalline stillness. Thornton's face went through a transformation that would have been comical if the implications weren't so catastrophic. His complexion drained to the color of old parchment. His mouth opened and closed without sound. His eyes developed the 1,000-yard stare of a man watching his career evaporate in real time. Commander, the word came out like a prayer from a condemned man. That's correct, Sergeant. Vivian's voice remained level and professional. And for the past 43 minutes, I've been observing and documenting the behavior, discipline, and professional conduct of this unit. She looked around the room, making eye contact with Marines who suddenly couldn't bear to meet her gaze. Phones disappeared into pockets with lightning speed. Corporal Hadley, assault on a superior officer, failure to verify identity before engaging, multiple violations of professional conduct standards. Hadley looked like he was going to be sick. And Staff Sergeant Thornton, failure to maintain unit discipline, failure to verify credentials of visiting personnel, creating a hostile environment for inter-service cooperation, threatening behavior toward a superior officer. She closed her identification wallet. The assessment period is now concluded. I have more than sufficient documentation to complete my report to Naval Special Warfare Command and Marine Corps leadership. The implications hung in the air like toxic smoke. Career-ending disciplinary action, courts-martial, dishonorable discharges, years of military service destroyed by 43 minutes of spectacular stupidity. However, Vivian said, and that single word carried more weight than anything else she'd spoken. Assessments can be amended, depending on how the remaining evaluation period proceeds. A spark of desperate hope flickered in Thornton's eyes. Ma'am, if there's anything we can do to... There is. Vivian cut him off. But it's going to require something that hasn't been much in evidence tonight. It's going to require you to listen, to learn, to demonstrate that maybe, just maybe, you're capable of growing beyond your current limitations. She checked her watch. You have 12 hours to prepare. Tomorrow morning, 0500, we're going to conduct a practical exercise, a test of your unit's actual capabilities versus your assumed superiority. Her gaze swept across the assembled Marines. The results will determine not just your individual futures, but whether Bravo Company continues to exist at all. She gathered her things with practiced efficiency. Get some rest, gentlemen. You're going to need it. With that, Commander Vivian Caldwell walked out of Mess Hall Charlie, leaving 37 Marines to contemplate the wreckage of their evening and wonder if they had any future left to salvage. The fluorescent lights of Mess Hall. Charlie continued their angry buzzing long after Commander Vivian Caldwell disappeared through the doors. 37 Marines sat in stunned silence, their half-eaten meals growing cold on metal trays, their assumptions about the world lying shattered around them like broken glass. Staff Sergeant Wade Thornton was the first to move. He walked to the center of the room on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. His face had aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. The confident swagger that had defined his leadership was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed stare of a man who had just watched his career circle the drain. Everyone. His voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat and tried again. Conference room, now. No one argued. No one made jokes. No one did anything except follow their sergeant out of the mess hall in a silence that felt like a funeral procession. Because in many ways, that's exactly what it was. The conference room was small and functional. A long table dominated the center, surrounded by metal chairs that had seen better decades. Maps of the training facility covered one wall. The other walls held unit commendations and photographs of Bravo Company through the years. Smiling faces in desert camouflage. Proud warriors returning from deployment. A legacy that now hung in the balance. Thornton stood at the head of the table. His squad leaders took their seats with the careful movements of men navigating a minefield. Corporal Hadley lowered himself into a chair near the back, still cradling his injured arm. His face was the color of old chalk, and his eyes kept darting toward the door, like he expected Commander Caldwell to materialize and finish what she'd started. Private First Class Colton Reeves sat in the corner trying to make himself invisible. His earlier enthusiasm for being part of the inner circle had evaporated completely. Now he just wanted to survive whatever was coming. Thornton spread his hands on the table and leaned forward. "Someone tell me." His voice was barely controlled. "Someone tell me how we just got blindsided by a Navy commander in our own mess hall." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. "Sarge." Hadley's voice was rough defensive. She didn't look like a commander. She looked like a contractor. How were we supposed to know? Thornton's hands slammed the table hard enough to make everyone jump. "That's the point, Hadley. We weren't supposed to assume. We were supposed to verify. That's basic security protocol. That's day one, week one boot camp fundamentals. And we failed. All of us." He began pacing the small room like a caged animal. She was on this base for 72 hours. 72 hours. She mapped our patrol routes. She hacked our communications. She photographed our rally points. And not one of us noticed. Not one of us thought to ask why there was a stranger wandering around our facility. The implications were starting to sink in around the table. If she'd been an actual threat, Thornton continued, half of us would be dead. The other half would be explaining to a board of inquiry how we let an enemy operator walk through our security like it didn't exist. Reeves raised his hand tentatively. "Staff Sergeant, what do we do now?" Thornton stopped pacing. "We find out exactly who we're dealing with, and we figure out if there's any chance of salvaging our careers." He pulled out his phone and began making calls. Favors owed, connections cultivated, the network of informal relationships that existed alongside the official chain of command. Within an hour, he had assembled a picture of Commander Vivian Caldwell that made their situation look even more hopeless. The information came in fragments, each piece more disturbing than the last. Operation Neptune's Wrath. Libya. 18 months ago. 8 high-value targets eliminated in a single night. Commander Caldwell had gone in solo after her team was compromised. She'd completed the mission alone, moving through a fortified compound like a ghost, leaving nothing but bodies in her wake. The Kandahar extraction, Afghanistan. 3 years ago, a helicopter pilot had been shot down in hostile territory. 40 enemy combatants between him and safety. Commander Caldwell had led a 4-person team through that gauntlet and brought the pilot home without a single friendly casualty. And Somalia, 6 months ago. The operation that had killed 3 of her teammates. The operation where Marine Force Recon Intelligence had failed catastrophically. The operation that had brought her here to their base with the authority to end their unit's existence. Thornton set his phone down on the table. The faces around him had gone pale as each piece of information was shared. The woman they had dismissed as a lost civilian contractor was one of the most decorated special operators in modern military history, and they had tried to intimidate her. They had grabbed her hair. They had threatened her in their own mess hall. "We didn't poke a hornet's nest." Thornton's voice was hollow. "We poked the queen." Hadley was staring at the wall with the unfocused gaze of a man reconsidering every life choice that had brought him to this moment. "What do we do, Sarge? How do we fix this?" Thornton was quiet for a long moment. "We can't fix what happened tonight. That's done. What we can do is show her that we're capable of learning, that we're not just the arrogant idiots she saw in that mess hall." He looked around the table at his squad leaders. 0500 tomorrow. Whatever she has planned, we meet it head on. We show her what Force Recon can really do when we're not busy being our own worst enemies. It was a thin hope, but it was all they had. Meanwhile, across the base, a different conversation was taking place. The Officers' Club was the kind of establishment where careers were made and broken over glasses of whiskey and carefully chosen words, where the real decisions happened away from the paperwork and protocols of official channels. Master Chief Garrett Holloway sat at a corner table with a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched. Across from him was Brigadier General Warren Ashford, a man whose silver eagles and weathered face told the story of 4 decades in uniform. They had known each other since Beirut, October 23, 1983, the day a truck bomb had killed 241 American servicemen, the day that had shaped both of their careers in ways that civilians would never understand. They had been young men then, full of certainty about how the world worked. They had learned differently in the rubble of the Marine barracks. Garrett. Ashford's voice was low, meant only for the two of them. Your protege put on quite a show tonight. Holloway smiled thinly. She's not my protege anymore, Warren. She's her own commander. I just helped point her in the right direction. Ashford swirled his drink, watching the amber liquid catch the light. She has the authority to recommend dissolution. That's not a recommendation to be made lightly. Bravo Company has problems, but they're not the only unit with a toxic culture. If she pulls that trigger, it sends a message. That's what she's counting on. Ashford studied his old friend. And what are you counting on? Holloway was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 35 years of hard-earned wisdom. I'm counting on her being smarter than I was. He finally picked up his bourbon, took a small sip. After Grenada, I was angry. Angry like she is now. I wanted blood. I wanted the people responsible for my brother's deaths to pay. So I destroyed 3 careers, used every connection I had to make sure they never worked in military intelligence again. Was it justified? Every word of my reports was true. They made decisions based on assumptions instead of verification. They ignored contradictory intelligence because it didn't fit their preconceptions. 6 men died because of their arrogance. Holloway set his glass down. But 30 years later, Warren watched the same patterns repeat. Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia. The people I destroyed were replaced by others who thought exactly the same way. Because I attacked the symptoms, not the disease. Ashford nodded slowly. You think she can do better? I think she has to try. Holloway's steel-gray eyes met Ashford's. She's carrying 3 deaths in her chest. Briggs, Webb, Jennings. Good people who died because of institutional arrogance. If she just destroys Bravo Company, she gets revenge. But she doesn't get change. And if they can't be changed, Holloway's smile was thin and tired. Then she destroys them with a clear conscience, knowing she gave them every chance. But I've seen those Marines' records. They're not bad soldiers. They're soldiers who've been allowed to become their worst selves because no one ever held up a mirror and made them look. Ashford considered this. What's her plan for tomorrow? Holloway told him. When he finished, Ashford let out a low whistle. She's going to hunt them. No, Holloway shook his head. She's going to show them what being hunted feels like. There's a difference. What's the difference? When you're hunted, you're prey. When you're shown what being hunted feels like, you're a student. The lesson only works if they survive to learn from it. Ashford raised his glass. To lessons learned the hard way. Holloway clinked his glass against the general's. The only lessons worth learning. The pre-dawn darkness at Camp Lejeune carried a weight that pressed down on every Marine standing in formation on the parade ground. At 04:45, 37 men stood in perfect rows, their breath visible in the morning chill, their futures hanging in the balance of whatever Commander Caldwell had planned. They had not slept. How could they? Every man among them had spent the night reviewing protocols, studying manuals, running through scenarios in their minds. They had cleaned their weapons with obsessive attention to detail. They had checked and rechecked their equipment. They had done everything they could think of to prepare for an evaluation they knew nothing about. Staff Sergeant Thornton stood at the front of the formation. The desperation of the previous night had been replaced by something harder, a determination forged in the crucible of humiliation. He had spent his career building a reputation as a warrior. He would not let that reputation die without a fight. Corporal Hadley stood in the second row. His shoulder still ached from the joint lock Commander Caldwell had applied. The bruise spreading across his chest was a purple reminder of the elbow strike that had driven the air from his lungs. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the wound to his pride. He had built his identity around being the toughest man in any room. Last night had shown him that identity was a lie. Private First Class Reeves stood at the back of the formation. He was thinking about the 12 hours since the mess hall incident, about the conversations he'd overheard, about the way the older Marines had spoken about Commander Caldwell with a mixture of fear and grudging respect, about the realization that everything he thought he knew about strength and weakness might be wrong. At precisely 0503 vehicles approached the parade ground. The first sedan disgorged Colonel James Bradford, the base commander, and Major Patricia Vance, his executive officer. Their faces were carefully neutral, but their presence indicated the seriousness of what was about to happen. The second vehicle produced Brigadier General Warren Ashford, 62 years old, silver hair, the bearing of a man who had seen everything and been impressed by very little. His presence meant that whatever happened today would be reported to the highest levels of Marine Corps leadership. But it was the third vehicle that commanded everyone's attention. A modified Humvee pulled to a stop at the edge of the parade ground. The door opened and Commander Vivian Caldwell stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. She was wearing full combat gear, not the dress uniform of an officer conducting an administrative evaluation, not the utilities of someone planning to observe from a distance, full combat gear, the kind that showed wear patterns from actual use, equipment that had seen real operations in real hostile environments. Her auburn hair was pulled back tight beneath a tactical helmet. Her green eyes scanned the formation with the systematic assessment of a predator evaluating prey. Her movements were economical and precise, every gesture speaking of absolute confidence in her own capabilities. She looked like what she was, a weapon in human form. Colonel Bradford's voice carried across the parade ground. Gentlemen, you are about to participate in a practical evaluation designed to assess your unit's operational readiness and professional competence. This evaluation will be conducted by Commander Caldwell, observed by General Ashford, and documented for review by Marine Corps leadership. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The scenario is simple. Commander Caldwell represents a high-value target located in hostile territory. Your mission is to capture or neutralize this target using appropriate tactics and procedures. Vivian stepped forward. Rules of engagement. Her voice was clear and cold in the morning air. I will be armed with simulation rounds and defensive equipment only. You will have full access to your combat loadout, including simulated weapons communications and support assets. The exercise area encompasses the entire training facility, approximately 4 square kilometers of varied terrain. She looked directly at Thornton. You have 15 minutes to plan your operation, organize your forces, and begin execution. I will give you a 5-minute head start before beginning evasion. Your objective is to locate, fix, and capture the target within 2 hours. General Ashford stepped forward. Understand this, Marines. His voice was granite. This is not a game. This is not a training exercise where everyone gets participation trophies. This is a practical demonstration of your capabilities measured against genuine special operations standards. He gestured toward an observation post set up on a nearby hill. Your performance will be monitored, recorded, and analyzed by personnel with actual combat experience in similar operations. There will be no do-overs, no second chances, no excuses. His eyes swept across the formation. What happens in the next 2 hours will determine whether Bravo Company continues to exist or becomes a footnote in Marine Corps history. Vivian checked her watch. 15 minutes, Marines. Use them wisely. And then she was gone, moving toward the tree line with the fluid grace of a predator returning to its natural habitat. Within seconds, she had disappeared into the darkness like she had never existed at all. Thornton wasted no time. He spread a topographic map on the hood of the nearest vehicle and gathered his squad leaders around him. His voice was clipped and professional, the desperation of the previous night channeled into focused determination. All right, listen up. We're hunting a SEAL commander with unknown capabilities in 4 square kilometers of varied terrain. She knows we're coming. She's had time to prepare, and she's already demonstrated that our assumptions about her are worthless. Hadley leaned over the map, his injured shoulder protesting the movement. Sarge, she's one person? We're 37. The numbers have to count for something. The numbers, Thornton's voice was grim, didn't help you last night when she put you on the floor twice. Hadley's face reddened, but he said nothing. Thornton looked around at his squad leaders. We need to think like hunters, not like bullies. We need to use our advantages, communications, coordination, local knowledge, while minimizing our exposure to hers. Reeves spoke up from the edge of the group. What are her advantages? Staff Sergeant Thornton studied the map. Superior individual skills, better environmental awareness, extensive experience in evasion and escape. She'll use the terrain, create multiple fallback positions, probably try to isolate us into smaller groups where she can engage on favorable terms. He began marking positions on the map with swift strokes. We're going to set up overlapping search grids, maintain constant communication, move in mutually supporting elements. No one operates alone. No one breaks radio protocol. No one engages without backup. The plan that emerged was actually competent, a testament to the training and experience that had made Bravo Company a respected unit before their culture had begun to rot from within. Coordinated sweeps, overwatch positions, communication protocols that would prevent the kind of isolation tactics that special operators specialized in. What none of them realized was that they were planning in full view of Building 12's third-floor windows, 300 meters away, where Commander Vivian Caldwell was watching through a spotting scope and listening to their radio frequencies. She had hacked their communications 72 hours ago. Every word they spoke, every position they marked, every contingency they planned. She knew it all. As they finalized their strategy, Thornton's radio crackled to life on his private frequency. Check your sixth sergeant. Thornton spun around, weapon coming up, searching for the threat. There was nothing. Just empty parade ground and distant buildings. Vivian's voice came again, calm and professional. Your rally points are compromised. Your cache locations are known. Your communication frequencies are mapped. I've been on this base for 72 hours. Not 3. I know every inch you think you own. The psychological impact was devastating. Every advantage they thought they possessed had been an illusion. You have 5 minutes, her voice continued. I suggest you use them differently than planned. The radio went silent. Thornton stood frozen for a moment, processing the implications. Then his training kicked in, and he began barking new orders. Different rally points, alternative frequencies, modified search patterns. But the damage was done. The confidence they had built during their planning session had evaporated like morning mist under a harsh sun. They were no longer hunters. They were prey who hadn't realized it yet. The Marines deployed into the training area with professional precision that masked their growing unease. For the first 30 minutes, Commander Caldwell simply vanished. No thermal signature, no radio emissions, no physical evidence of passage. The tracking teams found nothing. The overwatch positions saw nothing. The communication network hummed with increasingly frustrated reports of negative contact. She had become a ghost. Then the messages began. Alpha Team reported movement in Building 7. Second floor, east window. Hadley's squad converged with textbook precision, flowing through the structure like they had rehearsed 1,000 times. The building was empty, except for a single brass casing deliberately placed on the windowsill. Engraved on it in small, precise letters, 137. Hadley stared at it with growing dread. She's counting us. His voice was barely a whisper, like targets. 20 minutes later came another report. Building 3. Movement in the southwest window. Bravo team moved to investigate with heightened caution. Again, the building was empty. But this time they found something that made their blood run cold. A mirror array positioned to catch the early morning sunlight and create the illusion of motion from 200 meters away. It was a technique straight out of the escape and evasion manual. A note was taped beside it. Sun angle 43 degrees, reflection distance 200 meters. Basic optics. She wasn't just evading them, she was teaching them, showing them exactly how outclassed they were. The radio network crackled with Commander Caldwell's voice 30 minutes into the exercise. This is your target. Your communications are my communications now. The words hit like a physical blow. She had complete access to everything they were saying, every order, every position report, every tactical decision. They were operating in a fishbowl, and she was watching their every move. Charlie team reached their rally point at the abandoned motor pool where they had cached additional equipment the night before. What they found made their tactical situation crystal clear. Every piece of equipment had been moved, not stolen or destroyed, but rearranged in a perfect geometric pattern. Weapons field stripped and sorted by component. Ammunition organized by caliber and manufacturer date. The message was unmistakable. She had been here. She had touched everything they thought was secure, and she had left it all in place just to prove she could have taken it. The note left on their radio read, OPSEC failures, 1 visible planning, 2 predictable caches, 3 assuming home field advantage. You have 90 minutes remaining. Thornton received the report with a jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. The frustration was building. The desperation was growing. Every tactic they tried, she countered. Every position they took, she had anticipated. They were dancing to a tune she had composed before they even woke up that morning. He made his fatal error at the 60-minute mark. All teams converge on grid square Tango 7. High ground. Overlapping fields of fire. We dig in and make her come to us. It was textbook defensive doctrine. Seize the high ground. Establish interlocking fields of fire. Force the enemy to attack into your strength. It was exactly what Commander Caldwell had been waiting for. As 37 Marines took position on the hill, establishing the perfect defensive formation, her voice crackled across their radios one more time. Textbook positioning. Perfect conventional tactics. Unfortunately, you're not facing a conventional threat. A pause. You're not in a defensive position, Marines. You're in a kill box I designed 3 days ago. The smoke grenade landed in the center of their formation. It came from an angle no one was watching, a direction no one had considered because the terrain analysis said it was impassable. White phosphorus turned their perfect visibility into 0 visibility in 4 seconds. Marines went prone, established security perimeters, tried to maintain unit cohesion despite complete loss of visual reference. What happened next was systematic dismantling. Lance Corporal Morrison disappeared first. Commander Caldwell appeared beside him like a ghost in the smoke. Nerve cluster strike to the brachial plexus, 8 seconds from contact to cable tie restraints. His radio went dead mid-transmission. A paired position on the perimeter heard a rock thrown to their left. They separated by 15 meters to investigate. Commander Caldwell eliminated each within 22 seconds. Each man thinking his partner was still operational until it was far too late. Corporal Hadley had learned something from the previous night. He took a non-standard position, maintained irregular movement patterns, kept his back against solid cover, and his weapon oriented toward multiple threat axes. He lasted 3 minutes. Commander Caldwell found him anyway. This time she used a different technique, a compliance hold instead of the nerve strike from the mess hall. Better, Corporal. Her voice came over the radio for everyone to hear. You're learning. The smoke began to clear. Marines were reforming, trying to account for personnel. 7 were gone. 7 men in blue training tape indicating simulated casualties. 7 operators who would have been corpses in a real engagement. 7 more fell in the next 6 minutes. Commander Caldwell moved through their formation like a scalpel through tissue. Close quarters combat, pressure point manipulation, joint locks, psychological dominance. Each elimination was clean and precise. Each lesson was delivered with just enough force to incapacitate, never enough to cause permanent damage. She was teaching them what real capability looked like, teaching them the difference between confidence and competence. Private First Class Colton Reeves found himself separated from his unit in the chaos. His training said to link up with friendly forces, maintain unit cohesion, follow the established protocols. But something clicked in his mind. He remembered Commander Caldwell's words from the mess hall about assumptions, about the difference between following protocols and actually thinking. Instead of searching for his unit, he stopped. He found a position in a building Commander Caldwell had already cleared. He crawled under a tarp that blended with the debris. He controlled his breathing, minimized his thermal signature, and he waited, not searching, not hunting, thinking like the hunted instead of the hunter. For 12 minutes, he evaded the finest SEAL operator most of them would ever encounter. She swept through his building twice. Her footsteps passed within 3 feet of his position. Her tactical light played across the walls inches from his face. He didn't move. didn't breathe, didn't exist. Finally, she detected him through a displaced dust pattern on the floor where he had shifted position slightly. A microscopic detail that most operators would never notice. But instead of simply eliminating him, she keyed her radio to broadcast. Private First Class Reeves lasted 12 minutes. Know why the remaining Marines froze listening? Because he stopped thinking like a Marine and started thinking like an operator. He used terrain, patience, enemy behavior analysis. He adapted. Her voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. The rest of you repeated failures. If a 22-year-old private can evolve under pressure, what's your excuse? The psychological impact on the remaining Marines was profound. Their youngest member had outperformed their seniors by abandoning everything they had taught him. 17 Marines remained when Commander Caldwell's voice came across the radio one final time. Exercise terminated, weapons safe. I eliminated 20 operators using minimal force, 0 injuries. Could have been lethal 47 times. Chose education. A pause. That's the difference between killing and teaching. From the observation post, General Ashford turned to Master Chief Holloway. She just demonstrated why SEALs exist. Not because they're better warriors, because they think differently. His eyes swept across the training area where 37 Marines were slowly emerging from cover, their faces shell-shocked and pale. Question is, can Marines learn that, or are they too far gone? Holloway watched Vivian emerge from the tree line, moving toward the parade ground with the same fluid grace she had shown throughout the exercise. That's what the next 72 hours will tell us. The parade ground felt different when Bravo Company reformed. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the concrete. The Marines stood in loose formation, their equipment dirty, and their pride shattered. 20 of them wore the blue tape of simulated casualties. The remaining 17 looked like survivors of a natural disaster. Commander Caldwell stood before them, her combat gear showing no signs of exertion. She had spent 2 hours systematically dismantling their unit, and she wasn't even breathing hard. Before we discuss performance, her voice carried across the silent formation. You need context. She pulled a folder from her tactical vest. The classification markings were visible even from a distance. 6 months ago, SEAL Team 5 conducted a joint operation with Marine Force Recon in Somalia. The mission brief said one target: minimal security. Her voice remained level, but something harder crept into her tone. Reality was 12 hostiles, a weapons cache large enough to level a city block, a prepared ambush in a compound that was supposed to be clear. She opened the folder. Lieutenant Nolan Briggs died in the doorway. He was my best friend. We went through BUDS together. He pulled me through Hell Week when I wanted to quit. He had a wife named Sarah who still wakes up reaching for him in the middle of the night. The Marines stood frozen. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb died in the compound. 15 years of service. 3 months from retirement. His wife had already bought the house where they were going to grow old together. Vivian's green eyes swept across the formation. Petty Officer First Class Laura Jennings took a round through her left eye. She had a husband named David and a daughter named Emma, who just turned 4. Emma still asks when mommy's coming home. The silence was absolute. The investigation revealed that Force Recon intelligence was based on assumptions, not verification. Local sources had provided contradictory information. That information was dismissed as unreliable because it came from people who didn't look like Marines, who didn't think like Marines, who weren't part of the club. She looked at Thornton. That operation killed my friends because of the same institutional arrogance I witnessed in your mess hall last night. The same dismissal of anyone who doesn't fit your preconceptions. The same absolute certainty that you know better than everyone else. Thornton's face had gone pale. Commander, we had no idea. No, you didn't, because you were too busy playing king of your little castle to consider that maybe, just maybe, you didn't have all the answers. She held up the folder. These are orders authorizing me to recommend Bravo Company for dissolution. Your performance today was supposed to decide which recommendation I make. The weight of those words hit like physical blows. Not just careers. The entire unit's existence had been on the line, and they had failed. Spectacularly. However, Commander Caldwell's voice shifted slightly. You demonstrated something today. Not competence. You failed at every objective I set, but capacity for learning. She looked at Reeves, still bearing the blue tape of his simulated capture. Private First Class Reeves showed more tactical adaptability in 12 minutes than most of you showed in 2 hours. He questioned his assumptions. He thought like an operator instead of following protocols blindly. Her gaze returned to Thornton. That's what I'm looking for. Not perfection, growth. The question is whether you're capable of it. Master Chief Garrett Holloway approached Vivian as she finished addressing the formation. His weathered face held an expression she couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe concern. Or maybe something more complex that encompassed both. You made your point. His voice was low, meant only for her. They know what they're facing now. Vivian pulled off her helmet and ran a hand through her sweat-dampened hair. They needed to understand. They understand fear. That's not the same as understanding change. She looked at him sharply. What are you saying? Holloway was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 35 years of wisdom. You proved they're weak, but Nolan didn't die so you could prove that. He died so you could change it. The words hit harder than any physical blow. You think I'm doing this wrong? I think you're doing what I did in '83. Holloway's steel gray eyes met hers, punishing instead of teaching. There's a difference, and I spent 30 years learning it the hard way. He gestured toward the parade ground where Bravo Company was slowly dispersing. Those Marines are broken right now, humiliated, scared. You can leave them that way and they'll either wash out or transfer somewhere else where there'll be exactly the same problems for someone else to deal with. He paused. Or you can help them rebuild. Show them what they could become instead of just showing them what they're not. Vivian was silent for a long moment. Nolan would want change. Her voice was barely a whisper. Not revenge. Holloway nodded slowly. He'd want his death to mean something. And it can, but only if you're willing to do the harder thing. What's the harder thing? Teaching them to be better. Not just breaking them down, building them back up. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder. You've got 72 hours. The question is what you're going to do with them. I've seen what happens when anger makes the decisions. It doesn't end well. For anyone. Vivian looked out across the training facility. The sun was fully up now, casting golden light across a landscape that had been a classroom for 2 hours. A classroom where every lesson had been written in failure and humiliation. Holloway was right. She had proven they were weak. Now she needed to help them become strong. That was the harder path. The path that led somewhere other than just destruction. The path Nolan would have wanted her to take. Okay, she said finally. 72 hours. Let's see what they're capable of becoming. The 72 hours that followed would reshape everything Bravo Company thought they knew about themselves. It began before dawn on the first day. Day 1 focused on close quarters combat, not the stylized techniques they had learned in basic training. Real combat, the kind that happened in confined spaces against opponents who wanted to kill you. Commander Caldwell demonstrated each technique she had used during the exercise, breaking down the physics, the anatomy, the psychology, the timing, showing them exactly how she had dismantled their unit piece by piece. The nerve strike to the brachial plexus that had dropped Hadley in the mess hall. Here, she pressed 2 fingers against the point on Hadley's arm where the nerve surfaced. Pressure here disrupts the signal pathway to your entire arm. Enough force and you lose motor control for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on individual physiology. Hadley practiced the technique 72 times before executing it correctly. 72 failures before 1 success. Competence isn't talent, Corporal. Vivian watched him work through the repetitions with relentless patience. It's repetition past the point where most people quit. It's doing something wrong 72 times and still believing you can get it right on the 73rd. Master Chief Holloway moved through the training area, correcting form and offering guidance drawn from 3.5 decades of experience. Your instinct is to use strength. He adjusted a Marine's grip during a joint lock demonstration. Strength is finite. Leverage is infinite. A 100-pound woman can control a 200-pound man if she understands where the body breaks. The Marines trained until their muscles screamed. Then they trained some more. Holloway pushed them past exhaustion into the space where only will remained, where the body was nothing but a vehicle for determination, where they discovered reserves they didn't know they possessed. This is where warriors are made. His voice cut through their fatigue. Not in the gym lifting weights. Here, in the space between giving up and pushing through. Every time you choose to continue when your body says stop, you become something more than you were. By the end of day one, every Marine in Bravo Company had been submitted by Vivian Caldwell at least once, and every one of them had gotten back up. That night, Thornton found Vivian alone in the training facility. She was reviewing notes, her face illuminated by a single lamp. The folder with the photographs of her fallen teammates lay open beside her. "Commander," his voice was hesitant. "May I speak freely?" Vivian looked up. Her green eyes held none of the cold assessment from the mess hall, just exhaustion and something that might have been hope. "Go ahead, Sergeant." Thornton sat down across from her. "I've been thinking about what you said, about Somalia, about your friends." He paused, searching for words. "I've lost people too. Not like you did, not because of intelligence failures, but I know what it's like to carry that weight, to wonder if you could have done something different." Vivian was silent, waiting. "What happened in that mess hall?" Thornton's voice was rough. "That wasn't about you. Not really. It was about us, about what we'd become. We were so busy proving we were the best that we forgot what being the best actually meant." He looked at the photographs on the table, at Nolan Briggs, at Marcus Webb, at Laura Jennings. "I can't bring them back, but I can make sure their deaths teach us something. That's what you're trying to do, isn't it? Turn their sacrifice into something that matters." Vivian closed the folder gently. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do. Then we'll help you, all of us. Whatever it takes." Day 2 brought joint operations. SEAL Team 5 arrived at Camp Lejeune for combined training. 12 operators who moved with the fluid precision that came from years of working together in the world's most dangerous environments. The first exercise was a compound assault. Marines and SEALs working together to clear a mock terrorist stronghold. It failed in 11 minutes. The problem wasn't capability. Both units had the skills to complete the mission. The problem was integration. The Marines treated the SEALs like superior beings instead of partners. They deferred when they should have asserted. They followed when they should have led. Master Chief Holloway called a halt. "Partnership means equals." His voice carried across the training area. Not subordinates, not superiors. Equals with different capabilities working toward a common objective. He looked at Thornton. "Staff Sergeant, when you're clearing a room with a SEAL operator, they're not there to show you how it's done. They're there to watch your sector while you watch theirs. You protect each other. That only works if you trust each other. And trust starts with respect." The second attempt succeeded in 23 minutes. Perfect coordination between complementary capabilities. Marines providing the aggressive forward momentum, SEALs providing the precision elimination of high-value targets. Each unit covering the other's vulnerabilities. Each operator trusting that their partner would be where they needed to be. Thornton and the SEAL team leader clasped hands after the exercise. "First time I've understood what joint operations really means." Thornton's voice held a new note of humility. Not competing, completing each other. The SEAL operator nodded. "That's the only way any of us survive what's coming." That evening, Vivian gathered Bravo Company for a different kind of lesson. No techniques, no tactics, just truth. She stood before them with the folder open, the photographs visible. You've seen these faces. You know their names, but you don't know who they were. She picked up the first photograph. Nolan Briggs. He was terrible at poker. Absolutely terrible. Lost every hand because he couldn't bluff to save his life. But he was the first one through every door, the last one to leave any firefight. He believed that leadership meant going first into danger, not sending others ahead. She set the photograph down and picked up another. Marcus Webb. He could fix anything. Engines, radios, relationships. When my marriage was falling apart, he sat with me for 6 hours and just listened. Didn't offer advice, didn't judge, just listened. That's harder than it sounds. The third photograph, Laura Jennings. She was the best shot on the team. Better than me, better than anyone. But what made her special wasn't her aim. It was her patience. She could wait for hours in a hide site without moving, without complaining, without losing focus. That kind of discipline isn't taught, it's chosen. Vivian looked at the Marines. They weren't just operators. They were people, with families, with dreams, with futures that were stolen because someone decided their assumptions were more valuable than verified intelligence. She closed the folder. That's what's at stake. Not your careers, not your reputations. Lives, real lives. And the culture you carry with you determines whether those lives are saved or lost. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the mess hall. This wasn't fear. This was understanding. Day 3 was the final test. Hunt Commander Caldwell again. Same rules, same terrain, same 2-hour time limit. But this time, everything was different. The Marines didn't begin by making assumptions. They challenged credentials of every unknown individual they encountered. They verified identity through multiple channels. They treated every stranger as a potential threat until proven otherwise. They didn't rely on predictable patterns. Instead of using the rally points and cache locations from their previous planning, they established new positions based on randomized selection. Communication protocols included frequency hopping that made interception exponentially more difficult. They didn't assume home field advantage. Reeves led a team to Building 12 before the exercise began. They cleared the observation post that Caldwell had used to watch their planning session. They denied her the intelligence advantage she had exploited so effectively. Most importantly, they didn't think like Marines. They thought like operators. First contact came at 18 minutes instead of 47. A Marine patrol spotted movement in a sector that conventional analysis said was impassable. Instead of assuming the contact was impossible, they investigated. Instead of converging in a predictable pattern, they established a cordon that cut off escape routes while maintaining mutual support. Commander Caldwell evaded the initial contact, but the pursuit was relentless. The Marines had learned from watching her techniques during the exercise. They used terrain the way she did. They moved in unpredictable patterns. They communicated through hand signals and prearranged codes that couldn't be intercepted. They hunted like predators instead of stumbling like prey. At the 40-minute mark, Caldwell was cornered in a warehouse complex. She could have escaped. The Marines knew that. Her capabilities exceeded their ability to contain her completely, but she was testing whether they could execute the tactics they had learned. At 1 hour and 4 minutes, they had her surrounded. Positive identification confirmed. Thornton's voice was calm and professional over the radio. All teams hold position. Alpha team breach on my mark. The breach was clean. Coordinated entry from multiple points. Overlapping fields of fire. Clear communication. And at the center of the warehouse, Commander Vivian Caldwell, standing with her hands raised in something that might have been a smile on her face. Target secured, Thornton reported. Exercise complete. The Marines didn't celebrate. They had learned that the mission wasn't over until it was over. They maintained security while extracting their target. They cleared the building methodically. They did everything by the book they had rewritten over 72 hours. On the parade ground, Commander Caldwell addressed them one final time. You adapted. Her voice carried a note that none of them had heard before, something that sounded almost like respect. You questioned your assumptions. You collaborated instead of competed. You didn't beat me through superior force. You beat me through superior thinking. She looked at each of them in turn. That's what makes operators. Not invincibility, adaptability. The willingness to admit what you don't know and learn what you need to learn. 3 months passed. Bravo Company was certified as a Tier 1 integration unit, the first in Marine Corps history to earn that designation. Their protocols for inter-service cooperation became the model for training programs across the Corps. Staff Sergeant Thornton was reassigned to Quantico, not as punishment, as recognition. He was teaching assumption management to the next generation of Marine officers, showing them how to recognize the blind spots that got people killed. Corporal Hadley was accepted into SEAL selection. The man who had grabbed Commander Caldwell's hair in the mess hall passed Phase 1 of the most grueling special operations training in the world. He was learning that true strength had nothing to do with size and everything to do with will. Private First Class Reeves was promoted to sergeant ahead of schedule. The youngest member of Bravo Company had demonstrated leadership potential that his superiors recognized and rewarded. He was teaching new recruits the difference between following protocols and actually thinking. The culture had changed. Not because it was ordered, because it was earned. The morning Bravo company deployed on their first joint operation, Commander Caldwell arrived unannounced. She wore dress blues. The ribbons on her chest told stories that most people would never know. Beside her stood Master Chief Holloway, his weathered face holding an expression of quiet pride. General Ashford was there as well. Couldn't miss this? The general's voice carried across the parade ground. Bravo Company's first deployment as a certified Tier 1 integration unit. This is what transformation looks like. Vivian addressed the formation. 3 months ago, I evaluated you for elimination. Today, you're deploying as one of the Marine Corps' finest units. Not because you never failed, because you learned from failure. Her green eyes swept across faces that had become familiar during the 72 hours that had changed everything. Remember what brought you here. Remember why you changed. And remember that the culture you carry with you can save lives or cost them. The choice is yours every single day. Thornton approached her privately before the deployment buses arrived. Thank you. His voice was rough with emotion. For not destroying us? I didn't save you, Sergeant. Vivian's response was gentle. You saved yourselves. I just gave you the chance. We'll honor Lieutenant Briggs's memory. Every operation. His lessons will guide everything we do. For a moment, something flickered in Vivian's eyes. That's all I wanted. Make their deaths mean something. 6 months after deployment, the call came. Bravo Company was operating in Syria when they intercepted a distress signal. A SEAL team had been ambushed, outnumbered, communications jammed, extraction impossible through conventional means. The roles had reversed completely. In Somalia, SEAL operators had died because Marine intelligence failed them. Now Marines had the chance to save SEALs. Thornton didn't hesitate. Saddle up. His voice carried the confidence of a man who knew exactly what his unit was capable of. SEALs need us. Let's show them what Bravo Company does. The extraction was textbook. Everything they had learned during those 72 hours. Every technique Commander Caldwell had taught them. Every principle Master Chief Holloway had drilled into their minds. Coordinated movement through hostile territory, precise communication under fire, mutual support that turned individual operators into a unified weapon. 0 casualties. Every SEAL extracted safely. The after-action report was sent to Naval Special Warfare Command. Thornton wrote it himself, and every word carried weight. Bravo Company successfully extracted SEAL team personnel from hostile engagement. 0 friendly casualties. Mission success achieved through principles of inter-service cooperation, adaptive thinking, and mutual respect between units. He paused before writing the final paragraph. We dedicate this operation to the memory of Lieutenant Nolan Briggs, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, and Petty Officer First Class Laura Jennings. Their sacrifice taught us that arrogance kills and humility saves. Every mission we complete carries their lessons forward. General Ashford's retirement ceremony was held 6 months later. 40 years of service. From the rubble of Beirut to the highest levels of Marine Corps leadership, a career that had seen everything the modern military had to offer. He asked Master Chief Holloway and Commander Caldwell to speak. Holloway took the podium first. His silver hair caught the light, and his steel-gray eyes swept across an audience that included some of the most decorated warriors in American history. The best operators I've known in 35 years didn't just win battles. They created more leaders. They understood that legacy isn't measured in medals or commendations. It's measured in the people you leave behind who are better than they would have been without you. He looked at Vivian. Commander Caldwell taught me that lesson when I thought I was too old to learn anything new. She showed me that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to question the answers you already have. Vivian stepped up beside him. Master Chief Holloway taught me that anger doesn't change anything. 6 months before I met Bravo Company, I wanted someone to pay for my friends' deaths. I wanted revenge dressed up as justice. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could hear the emotion beneath the words. He showed me that Nolan didn't die so I could destroy. He died so I could build. The 37 Marines of Bravo Company aren't just a transformed unit. They're living proof that change is possible, that the culture which kills can become the culture that saves. She looked out at the audience. General Ashford served 40 years protecting this country, But his greatest service might be what he did in those 72 hours at Camp Lejeune. He didn't interfere. He didn't protect careers. He let the process happen and trusted that warriors could become better versions of themselves. Ashford rose to accept the final salute of his career. His eyes were bright with emotion as he looked at the two people who had taught him that even after 4 decades there was still more to learn. The reception after the ceremony was crowded with officers and officials. But in a quiet corner, 3 people stood together: Holloway, Caldwell, and Thornton. The mentor who had learned to teach instead of punish. The warrior who had learned that mercy could be stronger than revenge. And the Marine who had learned that true strength came from admitting weakness. "Commander," Thornton's voice was low, "I never properly thanked you for seeing something in us worth saving." Vivian smiled. "I didn't see it at first. I saw arrogance and toxicity and everything I hated about the culture that killed my friends. Master Chief showed me that I was looking at symptoms, not people." Holloway nodded slowly. "We all see what we expect to see. The trick is learning to see what's actually there." A young Marine approached them hesitantly, new to the ceremony, clearly overwhelmed by the concentration of legendary figures. "Commander Caldwell, ma'am, I'm being assigned to Bravo Company next month. They told me about what happened, about the mess hall, about the transformation. I wanted to ask, what should I know before I report?" Vivian studied him for a moment. "Remember that every assumption you make is a potential failure point. Question everything, including yourself." The young Marine nodded seriously. "And remember this," her voice softened, "the people you serve with are more important than the mission you're on. Take care of each other. Everything else follows from that." 3 weeks later, Commander Vivian Caldwell received new orders. Another base, another unit flagged for assessment, another culture that had drifted into toxicity and arrogance. She packed her gear in the same methodical way she had packed it dozens of times before. Notebook, tactical equipment, the folder of photographs that never left her possession. Nolan, Marcus, Laura. She touched each face briefly. "I'm still keeping my promise, still trying to make it mean something." Master Chief Holloway found her in the parking lot as she loaded her vehicle. "Need me to come along?" Vivian smiled. "I think I can handle it, Master Chief. You taught me well." Holloway nodded, but something in his eyes suggested he had more to say. "You know what I learned from watching you work with Bravo Company?" She waited. "That the teacher always learns more than the student. You taught them how to fight. They taught you how to forgive." The words hung in the morning air. Vivian considered them for a long moment. "Maybe," she said finally. "Or maybe they taught me that forgiveness and accountability aren't opposites. You can hold people responsible and still believe they can be better. That's wisdom. That's experience." She climbed into her vehicle and started the engine. Holloway leaned against the doorframe. "Go easy on them for the first hour at least." Vivian's smile held an edge. "Where's the fun in that?" She pulled away from the curb, heading toward a new base and a new challenge. In the rearview mirror, she could see Holloway watching her go. An old warrior who had passed his knowledge to a new generation, who had learned that destruction was easy but creation was legacy. The new base was 4 hours away, a Marine Corps facility in the Virginia Tidelands. Another force recon unit with another reputation for excellence that masked another culture of toxic assumptions. The mess hall was nearly identical to the one at Camp Lejeune. Same fluorescent lights, same metal tables, same smell of institutional food, same clusters of Marines who thought they owned every square inch of ground they walked on. Vivian walked in wearing Navy utilities without rank insignia. She collected her food and found a corner table. Back to the wall. Clear sight lines. Notebook ready. The familiar pattern. Within 15 minutes, she had drawn attention. A young corporal at the center table was watching her. His body language said everything his words didn't need to. The territorial assessment, the dismissive evaluation, the calculation of whether she was worth the effort of a confrontation. He stood up and began walking toward her. His approach was confident, aggressive, familiar. Vivian watched him come with the patient attention of a scientist observing a specimen. He stopped beside her table. "Hey, you look lost. This area is for operational personnel only. Maybe you should find somewhere else to eat." Vivian looked up at him. Those green eyes that had seen so much, that had watched friends die, that had witnessed transformation and redemption, that had learned the difference between punishment and teaching. She smiled. Tell me something, Corporal. Do you always introduce yourself to visitors by assuming they don't belong? The corporal's eyes narrowed. Around the mess hall, conversations were stopping. Attention was focusing. The pattern was repeating. But this time, Commander Vivian Caldwell knew exactly how the story would end. Not with destruction, with transformation. Let's see if you're smarter than the last unit. The cycle would continue. Not because the military was broken, but because excellence required constant vigilance, constant teaching, constant willingness to tear down what was broken and rebuild it better. Commander Caldwell had learned that lesson in the blood-soaked doorway of a Mogadishu compound. She had refined it in the mess hall at Camp Lejeune, and she would spend the rest of her career ensuring that it lived on. One transformed unit at a time. Because the best leaders don't just win battles, they create more leaders. They turn failure into wisdom, arrogance into humility, assumptions into verification. They leave every place better than they found it, even if it means tearing it down first. That was the legacy of Nolan Briggs, Marcus Webb, and Laura Jennings, written in the transformed lives of warriors who learned that true strength comes not from never falling, but from rising stronger every time.